Good evening. Thank you for joining us for tonight's Inspiration webinar. Inspiration Software is the embroidery software line of G7 Solutions in Designs and Machine Embroidery. Our Inspiration software line includes My Block Piecer, My Quilt Embellisher, My Quilt Planner, Perfect Embroidery Pro, Word Art and Stitches, Stitch Snapshots, and Perfect Stitch Viewer. Tonight's webinar features our My Quilt Embellisher, Crazy Quilt, or Psycho Patch. We have a wonderful team tonight assisting us, the tech support team, Nancy R., Chris L., Catherine A., Dory N., the Surgeon of Stitches, Queen of Crazies, Tamara Evans. And again, thank you for joining us and enjoy the webinar this evening.
Thank you, Dory. I appreciate it. Okay, well, let's get started on Crazy Patch. Crazy Patch or Crazy Quilting, or, if you get really crazy, you can call it Psycho Patch, was very popular around the turn of the last century, from the late 1800s into the early 1900s, and recently has made a resurgence in popularity. And I just wanted to go through a few pictures and point them out to you and how these were done. A lot of them are it's kind of a combination of and fancy hand embroidery stitches with lots of other motifs built in. So here is one picture, and I believe this one was done around 1880. There is a Masonic symbol on the bell here. I apologize. Here is a picture. If you look at this, this one was done around 1880, and you'll see the Liberty in the center here with a bell on top of it and some feather stitches around it, and there's actually a Masonic symbol on there, and there's lots of letters, Union, the end, in Union till the end. So this would have been after the Civil War at some time. So interesting stitches, and I love the border on this with these little like tongues of fabric that are overlapped and then have some type of decorative stitch around them. This next one is also an old quilt, despite it looking a little bit like some more modern quilts. In each of the, in each of these little corners between the sashings, and that's how it was put together in this case with sashing. There's an embroidery design, and then each of the squares are stitched by themselves with scraps of fabric. In fact, that's what they used, scraps from their fancy dresses. There were silks that were given away with tobacco products, lots of places where they found these. And this was often one of the first things a girl learned to do when she was young. After she did her sampler, then she'd do crazy patches. Here's another one that's a little bit closer up. I like the man on the horse down here in the lower kind of leftish corner, and the daisies that really look 3D. Can't really tell, but they kind of pop off of that page. And some ferns, and of course lettering. Lettering was a big part of it. And another motif you'll see over and over again right here is the spider web. And let's move on. Here you'll notice not only are the crazy quilting stitches holding down the patch, but they're also decorating inside of it. Like on this fan, there's some decorative stitches coming out. And this really showed, the talent that a woman had. I don't know that any men did this, but I don't know they didn't. But it was typically considered, a woman's art form. And here's some more. There again, we see the spider web with the spider hanging from it. Those Victorians were awfully fond of spiders, or else maybe they thought that would keep the spiders away. I'm not sure. Here's another one that is more like a regular pieced quilt, but there's the Dresden fan with without points and with points. And those just applique together in a crazy quilt format. Then with the crazy patch behind, then all of the squares sewn together. One thing that's very interesting about Crazy Patch is if you ever look at any antique ones, the back of the quilt is completely covered with a piece of fabric. That is not necessarily quilted to the quilt. It's very often just loose. So kind of like a duvet would be, only it's sewed around all of the edges. Then we have another patch here, again with some fans, quarter fans with the flowers accenting them. And here's a more modern approach. This is one that Nancy Zeman did with the silks and make a lovely evening bag. You could do it tone on tone or multicolors. It's quite lovely. Here's another old one. I thought this was really interesting how they started in the center with a regular star pattern and then worked out from there. And then I don't know if they just kind of went crazy with this, but they did the crazy quilting in the background with all these scraps of fabric. And here's some from our modern collection. These projects are available in modern crazy quilting or today's crazy quilting by Eileen Roach and Nancy Zeman. And here's one more. If you'll notice in this one, it really shows one of the simple ways to do Crazy Patch in the hoop is to stitch a square of fabric, or actually not in the hoop, but doing it with your sewing machine, stitch a square of fabric and then cover up the raw edge of it and stitch another one. So you see right here, they stitched this down and flipped it back, and the same here, so you can build out on it, kind of like a log cabin. Would be constructed, only these are odd shapes. And isn't that lovely? A nice beautiful fan with these, it looks like wool thread that was done. These are all hand stitches, but you can certainly mimic these with your embroidery machine and even add beads if you like to, afterwards. And there we go. So just a little trip through Crazy Quilt Land with some ideas of what we're going to do tonight. So let's open My Quilt Embellisher. Let me get it on the right screen here and open that. And I'll show you a block that I've done that is almost finished. So I'm going to have pictures for you, and we will put them up on the blog either this Saturday or the following Saturday with step-by-step pictures of how this was created. But I want to teach you the software lesson now, and Dory, can we make this available as a download as well?
Absolutely. You can either through the blog or through us.
Okay, I'd like to do it through us. So let me show you where I started with here. Let me open a new page. And I started with a block that is in our block library. If we go to Wacky Blocks, I guess that qualifies as crazy. Oh no, it's in Fan Blocks. Excuse me, Five Patch. Where are my fans? Well, I'll tell you what, this is what we do when we can't find them. We'll just go Fan. Do you know how to do this? Go down to the bottom and search, click on the down arrow, and it's going to take me through and show me there's fan waves. Here's some Mother's Fancy. See why that's a fan? Up, and here we go. This is the block that I chose, and it's actually under curved blocks, and then there's fans in the curved blocks, which is why I didn't see it right away. So I chose this block. And I'm just bringing it in as an 8-inch block, so I'm not going to change the size. Of course, depending on the size of your hoop, you may want to make it a different size. And it comes in just like all of our blocks do from our block library. It comes in as artwork. It also has with it, and this comes in quite handy here, a backdrop. So if I move my block out of the way, you'll see underneath I have a backdrop of that block, which makes it very easy to design on top of it, okay? But what I want to do first, and for those of you who do not have Block Piecer, that's fine. I'm going to give you directions and the design to do this. We can actually piece the fan part of this block in the hoop. And that's kind of the tricky part anyway. It's a very easy stitch and flip project to do. So let me show you how that's done, and then we'll come back over here and start decorating it. So I'm going to select all of, let me come over here and select all of the orange blocks. Sometimes it's easier to select them when you come over to the right-hand side to the sequence view. And then I'll just hold my Shift key down and select the other ones. And I'm going to save this. I'll save it as File, Save As, and we'll go to our Windows, Dime, Designs. And I actually have it already saved under the webinar for August of 2016. And it's called Fan Piecing. So let's go over to our My Block Piecer and open that design. So let's close out of here. I'm going to open up My Block Piecer. Now those of you who have Perfect Embroidery Pro, you should know that you don't ever have to leave the screen. Just do all of this in Perfect Embroidery Pro and you can go right to My Block Piecer capabilities and with and My Quilt Embellisher, and it's all included in there if you have purchased those programs. So here is My Block Piecer, and if you're not familiar with this at all, we do have some good webinars on it that are an introduction that let you know exactly how it works, but I'm going to show you a quick demonstration here. If I go to my library, and we'll go down to our webinar, and I'm going to pick up Fan Piecing, and here is my design. So I just saved the fan portion of that, and bringing it in here on the screen, if I select the entire thing, I can then come up to the top to my icons and select my workflow tool. This is actually going to create the design for me. So I'll click on that, and you'll see it's got 8 units or patches or pieces to this block, and there are 8 pieces to the fan in the picture. Now don't worry about the numbering right now because it really doesn't have anything to do with the way we're putting it together. It's just the way that the artist created this block. And you'll notice we're probably missing a number or 2 there anyway. So we'll come down and select our hoop. I'm going to stitch this in, I'm just going to do it in my big Bernina hoop, which is, where is it? 260 by 400. I can actually fit a couple of them in there. So if you're going to do 4 of these blocks and make a nice pillow with it, that works well. So I have it selected. Now all I have to do to build my in the hoop design, to digitize it, to create it from this artwork, is to select Auto Build right here. I'll click it, and now I'm done. It doesn't look like it, but let's take a look at our preview. And there it is. This is exactly how it gets stitched out, except before I save it, I want to change something, get out of preview, and I do like to sort the numbers so that they're in the sequence in which I stitch them. So I can say yes to that, and now look, I'm going to start at 1 and go all the way through 8, and then I'll be done. So if we preview now, we can see our numbers have changed on our pattern, and we can save it in a format for your machine, and then you can piece that in the hoop. Okay, so let's go back now. Well, actually, I want to do something before we go back. Close. Let's pull up, let me show you how this stitches out, because I think that's important. Oops, excuse me. Let's open a new page, and I'm just going to pull up the design I saved earlier, and we'll turn off the grid so those don't get in the way, and we'll turn off our commands because it shows me every time I change the needle and thread. And now we can just do a slow redraw or a virtual stitch out of this design by clicking up here at the top on the slow redraw icon, and I'll just press play. And the first thing that stitches out is your pattern. It's going to stitch out the whole pattern for you, and it will, it's just like drawing it or copying it from a foundation piece pattern. And you notice this is how the artist put it together, I do believe, with certain blocks first or certain patches first, but we don't care about that because we're going to stitch it the right way. And there you go. So it's now stitched out the entire pattern. Then it goes back and numbers each patch so you know exactly, hang on just a second, where you are. Then the next thing it's going to stitch is your first color green, or your second color green, which is the tack down. And when you print out the instructions, and we will include those in the file for you, it will tell you to place your first fabric right side up. I want you to notice that it has added a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You don't have to cut these pieces out. In fact, I find on something like this, it's easiest to take a hunk of fabric and line it up on the edge here, and then stitch your tack down, because the tack down stitches on this first piece. And on all the pieces, the tack down, but the first one you put your fabric right side up, it'll stitch the tack down inside of the seam allowance. So you're never going to see it, but it holds that in place for as you go through the process. Then you'll lay your next fabric down next to it, and you'll line up right here on the seam line, put it face right sides together with the first piece, stitch your perfect scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. So do you see there how the green tack down line is inside the seam allowance? Then you're going to flip that open and do your tack and continue that process until your entire fan is complete. And I'm going to take it out and just trim around. This is your raw edge. It's going to be an inch outside of the fan, the finished fan itself. And that's all there is to it. Now,
Yes, unplug and replug your, unplug and replug.
Can you hear me now?
Nope.
Hello?
No, you sound like you're in a tin can.
Hello?
There,
Sorry?
that's much better. Can you hear us?
Yes, now I can. Sorry. Tell me I had new hardware. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Sorry about that. I forgot to throw it over my shoulder so I don't lean against it. Okay. So do we have any questions so far on this little piecing process?
No, you've got it going from 1 to 8, and each piece is going to build off of the original piece, and all of the seam lines will be invisible. Am I correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, and the tops of these are going to be raw edges, correct?
Right now, yes, they are.
Okay.
But we're going to take care of that with the next step.
Super duper. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go back to Quilt Embellisher. Let's open that up. And the first thing I want to do is show you the finished design and step through it, and then we'll go back and see how it was created. And so you can see what we're doing here. I thought this fan was a great opportunity to utilize some of the beautiful crazy quilt stitches that we have in the software. And anytime you create a run stitch, which is what we can do in My Quilt Embellisher, we can only create 2 things from scratch. Remember, I can create a run stitch or I can create artwork. And from either one of those, I can use any one of my currently invisible stitches over here and convert it to those stitches. So these are actually convert to icons. I can convert it to a motif run or fill stitches, whatever. Okay, so let's take a step through this, and I'll show you how the block is constructed, and then we'll go back and create it together. So let's do our slow redraw again, and we will start with the first color, which is our red. I'm hooping stabilizer and by itself. And then I'm stitching this red color, which is just the outline of my block, okay? Then that shows me where I need to put down my background fabric. Then I'm going to stitch the blue in the center, And that is the tack down for my fabric, okay? So that will hold it in place. I have also, which you can or cannot do, it's entirely up to you, I've made mine out of cotton, so I wanted a little bit more loft with batting in there. They sometimes, but not very often, would use batting with actual crazy quilts. So you can either choose to put batting in or not, because a lot of times the fabrics that they were using were really high loft, like velvets or velveteens, that type of thing, or silks that had more texture to them, even upholstery fabric. So I'm going to tack that down, and I also included my batting underneath there. I just slid it under my hoop, so I knew exactly where it should go because of the red outline. So this tacks it all together. Then the next thing I'm stitching are two very small things. They are placement marks. And the reason I did that is because it's added a little bit. This is the placement mark here, and here's the placement mark. The reason I stitch those is I want to know exactly where that seam is. I can, when you select placement marks, you can move them. So I've got it lined up with the center seam through my fan. So I know when I stitch the decorative designs on it, they'll stitch exactly where I want them. Then it's going to give me a guide, kind of like an applique, on where to place my fan design. Now with my fan design, what I've done at this point, after I stitch this red, there, is I've trimmed the top and the bottom up to the tack down stitch that it does when it creates the design. So most of that seam allowance has gone away. Then I can line it up both with the red here and with my arrows so that I know it's going to be lined up perfectly. And when you lay that down, use a little water-soluble glue stick, or if you want to spray the back of your fan, if you like to use adhesive spray, you can do that. And then you will position it exactly in place here, and then you do two tack downs, one on each side. And then we start our crazy quilt stitching. So I started at the center so it wouldn't shift, and then I'm just stitching over each of the seam lines of the fan with crazy quilting stitches. And then you'll notice I'm coming back over the raw edges with another crazy quilt stitch to cover up that raw edge. And then I have one more thing to stitch, and that is a square all the way around. So, and what I would do right before that is slide my backing fabric underneath, because I'm going to put these together with sashing. I'm not going to wait till I'm completely done and back the whole thing. So I want my backing fabric to cover up the back of those stitches, okay, because that may not be as pretty on the back as it is on the front. And then I would simply remove my placement stitches here, and I'm good to go. So let's see how that is done. I want to go to design number 2. Here's my fan. So this is what I'm starting with. I have my fan, and the first thing I'm going to do with it, I can get rid of the green. Oops, first thing I'm going to do is ungroup this. Oh, it isn't grouped. The green just goes all the way through. This is kind of interesting, and you may notice this on some of your blocks in the Quilt Embellisher, because we're not technically, well, the theory wasn't to make them into blocks that you could piece together. So if you'll look, let me move the green out of the way. The green goes under the whole thing, and actually I can just delete that because we don't need it for anything. And I'm going to delete the black down here in the bottom because I don't want that either. And now you'll see I've got my backdrop up. It looks like, you know, I didn't delete it, but I did. And I can select my backdrop tool, and I can make that lighter so it is more of an illusion. Oop, that's a little too light. But you see over here in the properties box where you can change that however you want to, and just click apply to get it back where you want it. And I think there's probably good. All right, So it's a little bit lighter. But I still have all of these pieces of artwork here. Okay, the fan is all here. And what I want to do is create, first of all, Control Z, let's move that over. Okay, the first thing I want to do is select my entire block, which means I shouldn't have gotten rid of that green quite so quick. Hang on one second. Let's put it back there. Okay, there's the green, and put it back in place. I want to outline it, and it won't outline from the backdrop. So I want to select my green, select it here, right-click, create an outline, and I want that outline to be 1/4 inch outside of this artwork. So I'll do a 0.25, oops, not point, that won't work, 0.25, and say OK. Now this has created our outline that will stitch, the first thing we stitch, so we know where to put our fabric, but it won't stitch until we take this artwork and go up to our top here and convert it to a run stitch. Okay, so now we have our first color done. Then we're going to select our green again, and this time we're going to right-click, create another outline, but I want this one almost to the edge, but not quite. We'll do it, let's do it like 1/10 of an inch away, okay? So it's inside the seam allowance, but it's closer in. And click OK. And this is what will catch our backing and our stitch our fabric down and connect the batting, and then when we stitch it again at the end, it will hold the backing in place. So we want it in the seam allowance. Okay, so now we're going to select that one. Oops, let's select it here. Okay, and when you have trouble selecting things like that, if you go over to your properties box and click on the color or that object in the properties, then it's much easier to select it. And we want to do two things. We want to change the color so that there's a color stop between our basting, and change this to red, and then we also, by right-clicking down here in our box, color changes, and then we'll come up to the top and select to convert that artwork to a run stitch. So now I have 2 run stitches. If we look at it in 3D, you can kind of see where that's going there. Now I can get rid of my green. I'm going to delete that with my delete key, or you can click on it like on the black and right click and say delete. All right, so now I've just got my fan left in the center that is artwork. And I want to create my lines to tack that down once it's been stitched. So I will select both of those colors over here with the brown and the beige, and I'm going to combine them because I want it to not go around each individual piece. I want it to go around the whole thing. So I'll select combine, and now they're all the same color. Then I can right click and say create an outline, and I'm going to make this one right up almost on top of it. I'm going to make it 0.01, so 1/100th of an inch away. Click OK. And that now is a blue stitch, so let's change that to color number 3, because I do want color changes as we go through here. And we're going to convert that to a run stitch. Now, what we need to do, I'm going to dismiss the brown now. I don't need it anymore. I can delete it. So we see our backdrop of the fan. Now, when I stitch this, I want this to be like, I just want it, I want to have lines that will stitch down on the top and the bottom, but I don't want to add any bulk to my seam allowance. So I'm going to select this green stitch. So see, I don't want the lines going over here. I'm going to go to my reshaped or my tool, so I can see the nodes, and you see there's a node at the beginning of each stitch and down here at the bottom, and I'm going to select this node, right click, and say split that line. Then I'm going to come down to the one opposite it at the bottom, right-click, and say split that line. Now I have a separate line here that I can select. You see it's only this one line, and I'm going to delete it. Then I'll do the same thing on the other seam allowance. We'll come down, let's select the green, and select our reshape tool, or our shape tool. So we see our nodes, right-click, split the line. Because when you right-click, remember, it will tell you everything that you can do with that. Now you'll notice it split the line so it had this up here selected, not this down here, because it separated this from here. But I need to get rid of this other point, so I'm going to select the bottom one, right-click, and split that line. Now, select just that section, right-click, and delete. Now we just have one run stitch going at the edge of the top and one going at the edge of the bottom. I'm going to leave that as my placement stitch, and I'm going to select both of those by clicking in my properties box. I want to right-click, copy, right-click, paste, change the color. We're going to move to orange now. Not that we're going to change the thread on it, just want to force the machine to stop because of a color change so that I can do something, like in this case, lay down my fan to be tacked down. So now I've changed those to orange, and I want to make them a 2-ply stitch, and there's a reason for that. That's the way we do our appliques in G7 software, both in PEP and in My Quilt Embellisher. Then it's just a simple matter of I want to move these just inside so it catches my line. I want to move it in there, and I'll take this, whoops, not the green one. Let's select our orange stitch, and I'm going to move that just slightly in. There we go. That's our orange. And we can do Control-Shift to do some, or the Control key and our arrow keys to do some fine movements there. I just want it to catch the edge of it because the other stitches are going to hold it down, but I want it to stay in place when I first go in. Then I'll select the bottom one, and we'll move that over, select it, sorry, hit the wrong key, move it, well, okay. I'll just do it like this. Move it over and up a little bit so that it's just inside as well. Okay? So if we dismiss the backdrop, there's what we have. Do we have any questions so far, Dory?
Just one question our friend Debbie wants to know. Is there any reason that you would not want to use a whole piece of cloth and just use decorations on it?
No, there's no reason whatsoever.
Okay.
You could certainly do that. That would be lovely. And tone on tone's pretty too. And if you want to make this fan one whole piece of cloth and the background a different color, that would look lovely too. You are the artist. You can do whatever you like.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so now let's do one more thing before we start laying down our crazy quilt stitches. Remember those placement marks. I want to select those, and the placement mark is right here. I'm going to select them, and I'm going to click in the top right-hand corner and the bottom left-hand corner because these are the two that I want. Now you could add more if you want to, but I think these will work nicely for us. I didn't have any trouble locating it with that. Now, you notice, let me zoom out a little bit, it put them in the corners. That's where the default is. But here's the cool thing about placement marks, is we can pick them up and move them. So I'm going to move it down so that it's right at where that design should go. Okay, where that seam should go, excuse me. And I'll do the same down here. It's going to be more difficult to see. Whoops. That's why we have an undo key. I love it. Control-Z or click undo up at the top. And let me select the bottom one. I'm going to change its color just so you'll be able to see it. And we'll move it up so that it's right here. And I'll zoom in to double check those. That one's pretty much right on where I want it to be. And we're going to change the color on that one too, so that they stay together. And that one's just right on. Now those are very easy to just unsew when you're finished with your project, or once you've got your fan in place. And normally they stitch at the beginning of the design. It defaults to put them there. But that's not when we want to stitch them. We want to stitch them after we have our base fabric down. So we don't want to stitch them before the blue or the red. We can stitch it after that. So I'm just going to select it and drag it down where I want it to stitch. It can either stitch before or after the tack down or the placement for the fan. And now we're in good shape. Okay, so now comes the fun part, the decorating. We're going to take our satin stitches, or our crazy quilt stitches, and the first way we're going to do it is by creating a run stitch and then coming in and clicking over the top. So I'd make a click down at the bottom of that seam, and at the top of that seam, right click, and it creates a run stitch for me. Then I can come over to my properties box on the left top right hand side and change from standard to crazy quilting. If you click on the right here, the three little dots, it's going to bring up a picture of all of your crazy quilting stitches. And the one I like, and you can play around with these, and audition, do whatever you like. Let's try this stitch right here and see what it looks like. I'll say OK. Now one thing I'll warn you about, save you a little bit of time, when you go from a run stitch, the run stitch defaults to 3 millimeters. If you do a 3 millimeter crazy quilt stitch, it's going to be very small. Apply. Oops, I've got to select it, don't I? I'm going to change that again. We'll go to crazy quilting. Select that stitch, stitch 41. There are 50 crazy quilting stitches. Say OK, then click apply. And you see at 3 millimeters, that's tiny. Now, that could be kind of cool sometimes, but that's not what I'm looking for. So I'm going to change my stitch length here. From 3 millimeters, let's go to 10 and see what that looks like. Click apply. Excuse me. Hampton, quiet. Sorry, my family is very loud tonight. So if I like that, I'm going to leave that one. If I want to change the size a little, I can, but it makes them fit in there perfectly on these individual stitches. Maybe I wanted a size 8, which would be smaller, or perhaps I want it to be a size 25, which is really large. Now the thing about crazy quilting stitches is it will recalculate the stitch length. I don't have, a big long stitch going up the side of this arrow. It's just my, it breaks that into individual stitches, so they're not too long. Okay. Now let's select another line. I'll come back up to my run stitch and put a run path. And I'm going to start down here. And don't worry so much exactly about, the start and stop on there, because it's going to be covered up in the end. Oh, and I had that already set on crazy quilt stitching. So I want to change that stitch to a different stitch. We'll come in and select one. This one looks really pretty. Let's see what it looks like. And apply. Oh, I got to select my stitch first. I'm being absent-minded tonight. Okay, then change our stitch to, this one, sorry. And click OK. And change our stitch length. We'll start at 10 and click apply. That might be a little bit smaller than what we want. Let's jump to 20. I'm not sure how big 20 millimeters is, but I know it's twice as big as 10. That math I can do in my head. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I could make it bigger if I want to. We'll make it 30. See what that looks like? It's a little bit bigger. Maybe we'll split the difference and go 25 millimeters. And there you are. Okay, so we just keep doing that. Now the other thing we could do besides a run stitch and convert it is to just select a crazy quilt stitch. So if I come over here, and it says symbols on it, but it's really crazy quilt stitches, and click select, then I can pick a stitch and lay it down individually. Let's do this herringbone stitch, very popular in crazy quilting. So I can start down here at the bottom or at the top, and if I drag it out, I mean, I could make one stitch go that whole length if I wanted to, which if I was doing this by hand, I would. So I can just click and drag it to the length I want. The beauty of this is you get a little bit more organic look because your stitches aren't perfectly symmetrical. So I'll finish that one off right there. And there you go. Do I need to break for questions, Dory? I think I'll take that as a no. Let's do another one of those. And I'm going to select, let's do this stitch here. Click OK. And again, you just click and drag wherever you want that to be and however large you want it to get. So if I wanted to, going up here, I could make each one a little bit larger. I remember seeing that in the center of some fans in one of those quilts that we saw. Well, that one has to be really large. So you could do something like that. Another option with it is to use, there's some little bit different stitches in here. These first four, stitches 1 through 4, they're actually a combination of stitches, like this herringbone looking stitch. I'm not sure what it's called. My grandmother would be sure to tell me. But I can stretch that out, the whole length of it, if I want, because it is a group of stitches. So rather than laying each one of those down individually, it lets you do it as a group. Now, let me show you what happens if you do that from a run stitch. I'm going to click on my run stitch, come back here, and we'll make this a run stitch. And I've got my run stitches now doing as crazy quilting. I set the default without having a stitch, without having a run stitch selected. When I changed it to crazy quilting, it changed my default. So let's pick stitch number 1, and I'm going to say OK, and then I'm going to change my stitch length from 3 millimeters, which is crazy small, especially for a stitch that long. Let's make it 15 and see what happens.
And while you're doing that, our friend Denise asked us,
yes,
are there other crazy stitches you can add to the program?
Well, that is a great question, Denise. Yes, actually you could if you have Perfect Embroidery Pro, because that's where all of these are created. They are just like motif stitches, and in fact, if you chose to use a motif stitch instead, I'll show you that in just a moment. But yes, you could do that, but not in this program. But if you have any ideas, we would love for you to send them in, and we would be happy to make them. In fact, one of the pictures that came up at the very end of my slideshow was a picture of some stitches I thought were kind of cool that I'm going to try and make in Perfect Embroidery Pro, and we'll see how that goes. That might be a webinar one of these days. But here's what I wanted to show you about these stitches that are a combination of stitches. Here I have selected this stitch to be 50 millimeters in length. And you see it doesn't fill up the entire space. So you might be better off clicking and dragging, or we'll change that and we can play around with the numbers. Let's go to 60 and see, click apply. And now that fits in a little bit nicer. I might bump it back to 58. So that it's not running off the end, and apply, and there you go, and that fits in there nicely. So you may have to play with those longer ones. The other thing you can use for crazy quilting stitches are motif stitches. So if I want to, and you do have to do that from a run stitch. I'm going to create another run stitch here to here, right click, and select it, go to my properties, and instead of crazy quilting, I'm going to, or run stitch, I'll make that a motif. And we have loads of motif stitches that you can use. And a lot of them mimic traditional crazy quilting stitches. Like, oh, let's do this one, these little flowers. How cute is that? And there you go. Now those you will work on pattern length, which is, in this case, the length of one pattern in here. And it shows you 3 repetitions. So I made that 10 millimeters for that one pattern. And it fit nicely. If I wanted to make it 20 millimeters, it'd be twice as big. And again, it does recalculate the stitches for you. Any questions, Dory?
No, no questions, but I can remark that if you take each one of those individual designs, when possible, apart, they would make a lovely accent on different parts.
Oh, they would. And absolutely, because you could take a single crazy quilt stitch. We'll select one. Let's do, this is a lovely stitch. I'm going to select it. I'm going to come in and fill in some of my empty space up here with that. And how pretty is that? I like it a lot. Right? Oh, the other thing I want to show you too, the direction of the stitches. You notice my arrows are going up and pointing out to the larger side of the fan. If I select that and click on my shape tool right here, it will show you my start and stop point. The direction of the arrows is determined by your start and your stop. In all of these, my start point was at the bottom, and then my stop point out to the side. So if you wanted to flip those the other way, if you wanted those to go in or alternate every other one, then you could simply change your start and stop points, and it would go in the different direction. Okay? The other thing that you would want to do to finish this off, I want to select my green outline stitch here. In fact, I'll select both of them in one fell swoop. We'll go to color 3. I'm going to copy those, and I'm going to paste that, right click and paste. So they're right over the top of them, but it will do that. I'm going to change the color. Let's pick a color we haven't used yet, and I'm going to send them to the front. Okay, which means they're going to stitch last. And then, oh, that's not going to be pretty with yellow, but so we'll change it to brown. Anyway, then I'm going to convert those to crazy quilting. And to cover up the raw edge of that fan, and we'll select a stitch. Well, let's try this one and see what it looks like. And say OK, change my stitch length, and click apply. That might be a little bit big. Let's try 10 and see where we go. I usually do in multiples of 10 until I get it close. And there you are. So that would cover up the raw edges of our fan like an applique would. Now, a couple of other things the Victorians were very proud of was their other embroidery, not just the running, traveling type of embroidery stitches. So we have included a lot of decoration with our program. You have 50 different flourish stitches here. These are lovely to add to any design, and they are very scalable. So we could turn that on its side and put it in here. Ooh, maybe flip it the other way. Let's do a flip vertical and a flip horizontal. Yeah, so now the round part's up in the edge. And that's pretty. Maybe even bring it out this way a little bit to add to it. Another thing that we've included are borders. You have 100 different borders in here. And if you thought about it, you could even put your crazy quilting inside of one of these shapes. Take this one for instance. If I wanted to make a big shape that fit in there with a different fabric, that would just be lovely. Or I could use that as, you know, a place to put a monogram on a napkin. So let's put a monogram in the middle of that. I'm going to select from one of my 50 different fonts. Let's do a pretty fan script. Click OK. Enlarge the size of it after we select it to fit in there nicely. And there you go. All right. Also putting words on your crazy patch. You can do that as well. So I'm going to select another text box. I'll click on it and let's write in here Tamara 2016 and select an appropriate type of font. I like cursive a lot. Let's go to cursive, click OK, and it puts that out there for us. I'm going to move this over onto my fan and shrink the size down just a bit there. Okay, move it out a bit. And now, because we have all of the font capabilities that we have with PEP, not all the fonts, but all of the capabilities, I can take and select that and change. I want to move this up this way so it actually fits in that fan. And there you go. So lots of different things that you can do with crazy quilting. Use them on regular patches, use them on or regular patchwork to decorate it a bit, or put them on anything you like, including, you know, around the edge of a napkin. Wouldn't that be pretty with these flower stitches or this kind of broken stick looking stitch? Questions, Dory?
Yes, we do. Our friend Jane asks, is the fan one stitch together an applique that is that you are piecing on a background fabric?
Exactly. That's exactly what I've done. I've turned that fan into an applique because we don't have the capability in My Block Piecer or any program. Embroidery cannot piece curved seams. If you want to do curves, you would have to do them as an applique or do them with your sewing machine.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Can you repeat the difference on which way it fits in and which way it doesn't?
Oh, okay. There's two ways to lay down a crazy quilt stitch. And let's just make a run stitch here. I'm going to make that a real run stitch. Let me change my default back. Okay, so I'm going to make a run stitch just like that. Okay, that's a run. I'm going to copy and paste that one so you can, well, I don't need to do that. I'm just going to select it and then convert it to crazy quilting. And then it lets me select the stitch that I want, and this will make it fill in, except for these four up at the top where you may have to play to fit it in exactly in the space that you want. The rest of them work very nicely. So I can take this stitch here. Oh, let's do a directional one. Yeah, let's do this little teepee looking one. Looks like a mama and her baby. Or her husband, I don't know. Let's make it 25 long. And there you go. It fits very nicely in that. Now, if I had that same run stitch, and I'm going to do it the opposite way. I'm going to start down here and come up here. Ding, right click. And we'll select to make it the same crazy quilting stitch. It looks like, doesn't it look like a woman and a teepee and
yeah,
either a short husband or a kid? Yeah. We'll say OK and click, change that. What did I make it, 25? I don't recall.
25.
And apply. Oh, I've got to select it. See, this is what I forget. When it doesn't work, you don't have it selected. We'll make it 25. Select our stitch. And click OK and apply. So now you see it comes from the opposite direction. So adding those two together would actually be kind of interesting. Let's see what happens. Oh, scooch it over a little bit more. Maybe up or down, just depends how long your line is. You could get some really cool effects from that.
Boy, you sure could.
Yeah, so play around with combining stitches. And there's no reason you couldn't put a stitch of a different color with one of the other stitches. You know, throw a motif stitch in there. Add, like we could do that here. I'll copy that and paste it. Let's make it back into, well, we'll turn it to motif stitch and we'll pick something simple like these circles. How's that? And apply that. Make them much smaller and change the color. And so, you know, working with different stitches, put that over the center there, and you get different looks.
Yep. Okay. Now Vera asks, so you cannot stitch the fan on a fabric in the hoop? And then she asks, do you stitch?
I'm sure you could.
So you stitch it on a stabilizer, then trim and sew it on the block? That is her question.
Yes, and those instructions will be with the download that you receive. I'd like to use our Piece and Stitch stabilizer. It's a wash away, tear away, a soft tear away that actually disintegrates, if you will, in water, so that when I'm done with everything, I leave it in, I don't tear it away or anything like that. And once this quilt gets washed, if it ever does, then it will have that will disintegrate. You'll have a little bit of fiber left under your block or under your piecing, next to your batting or next to the backing, either one. And it works great.
Super. Thank you so very much. This was really fun tonight.
And look forward to the blogs on Saturdays, and you'll see the pictures step-by-step of stitching it out, and be able to download from, where will they be able to download from, Dory?
What I'm going to do is, if you get it to me before the end of probably tomorrow, I will attach it to their email.
Perfect. So everybody who tuned in tonight gets their copy of it, and enjoy, have fun. Just go psycho-patch.
All right. Thank you again. Have a good evening.
Good night.